Your country has erupted into a civil war. In this case, neither side is worth fighting for, and people will not allow you to stay neutral. How do you survive these events? This is one of our many scenario videos that I create, and this is to create an extreme situation, sometimes more common than others, in this case more extreme than usual, and how could you survive? That's really what this is. It's just, if this happened, how could you survive? Hopefully we don't have any of these, but historically we have these. The world, being we, see these every decade or few. We'll see one or more of these. And in this case, this is not about how to fight. This is more about just how to survive where you're trying to avoid the fight. Neither side is worth fighting for in this case. So this is not any type of anything directed at one country or any type of call to arms or anything like that. This is just a survival scenario. We will be bringing up some historical points just to kind of back up my points on my standing on why I feel certain things that I'm talking about are the way they are. I'll be bringing up some historical points on that. So yeah, some important notes. Yes, once again, this is not directed at any particular country. It's not a call to arms or action. This is not a prediction of future events either. And this is most certainly not a news or report on current events. This is just a scenario that we're going over, just to talk about, if you were in a similar situation, how could you go about the survival? So what would you expect? Historically speaking, many times, most of the time when things go to a war state, people don't allow other people to stay on a fence. They will persecute them until they are really just, they have to join one side or the other. They generally don't see it as acceptable to be neutral or staying on the fence. So expect that there's both sides that have this mentality that either you're with us or you're against us. So if you're on the fence, you're the enemy to both sides. Where fighting is not active, where you're not actually having people shooting at each other and whatnot, expect still that there's going to be hooliganism, civil unrest, disorder, chaos, other mayhem. That has been seen a lot of times, as we saw many of the conflicts that we've seen throughout history. They slowly boil up, where there's intolerable acts on each side. During our Revolutionary War, during the American Revolutionary War, for the United States to break away from England, the British would do various intolerable acts. A lot of them were tax acts, taxing us without representation. But there was also a case of a massacre and some other issues. Various points of disrespect on different levels that are seen by the other side as intolerable acts, and the other side then retaliates back with their own disrespect, their own things that are expected to be seen as intolerable acts to the other side, such as the colonists dumped British tea into the ocean, into the Boston Harbor. That was done in response to the British tea tax. So when one of those taxes was done, and so they dumped the tea into the ocean. Disrespect on both sides. And it finally comes up to a boiling point somewhere. In that case, it was when the British came and marched on Lexington. And they brought out 5,000 troops to round up the colonists that they felt like were causing problems. And the colonists met them there with about 70 militia and stood their ground. And it was supposed to just be a standing of ground, but someone on one side or the other, we don't know who it was, they fired the shot that was heard round the world. That was where it boiled over into fighting. They went ahead and fought there all the way on against Concord and all the way back to Bunker Hill, and continued to fight until that was 1775 when that started, and it wasn't until the early 1780s that that whole conflict was over with, that the Battle of Yorktown was fought. That was the ending battle to all of that. So these things, they bursted into more on that. When we had our Civil War, it was also mainly fought along east of the Mississippi. But there were some smaller skirmishes west of the Mississippi, but a lot of support even around the world. Like I said, that battle at Lexington, where that first shot was fired, that was known of as a shot heard round the world. Because people well outside, this is where I say civil wars rarely stay in the country of origin. Most of the time people will pick their sides at that point. And there will be other hooliganism and mayhem outside of the actual combat area, where people are actually shooting. Outside of that, there will be other hot mayhem and hooliganism in support of one side or the other. So in that case, we actually had the other major superpower at that time that was versing off at England. The French would supply and also help us navally, help us with their navy. They were supporting the American rebels at that time, the Patriots. While the Tories, the British supporters, well, they had Britain supporting them. So we had two world superpowers going at it. And that happens a lot of times. We ended up with, then during our Civil War, yeah, the French supplied at least uniforms, but they helped out the Confederates during that conflict. The Confederate SWAT teams, which were a special unit that wore extra baggy uniforms, making it very difficult to hit them because it was hard to tell where the person was inside that uniform. Those uniforms were of French origin. They were provided by the French to the Confederate States of America. So they rarely stay in their country of origin. Almost always there will be other people supporting it outside of that area. And yeah, so these are things to expect. Also expect evolution of technology and fighting tactics. When one side is outgunned or outnumbered, if they have a will that's strong enough to fight and survive and win, then they will evolve their technology and their tactics. We saw it in the Revolutionary War. The American militia started hiding behind trees, taking after Native American tactics. We see it throughout other times of warfare where, when we saw the jungle warfares over in Vietnam, that was more guerrilla warfare. Things change as needs require that. So expect it to maybe not look like anything that you've ever seen before. So yeah, those are some things to expect. Expect you're not going to be welcomed staying neutral. Expect that, even if you don't have fighting active in your area, you may still have people trying to just do silly things to you, leaving rattlesnakes in your yard. Who knows what they're going to come up with? Vandalism, maybe even taking a pot shot at you. It could really be there. Even if there are not armies there, they can still have issues there. And yes, even a neighboring border could be a hot zone. Just depends on how that country's politics are. The details of this exact scenario here, in this case here, you're dealing with a corrupt national government and rebels that are just corrupt and greedy. So you're deciding to stay neutral and out of the fight because neither side is worth fighting for in this case. Why support a corrupt government? Why support corrupt, greedy rebels? Either one of those really worth killing and dying for? I don't think so. So you decide to stay neutral and out of the fight, which we saw in the previous information there, that's not going to be welcomed. Now, in our case, too, the fighting has started in another region, and not any of the armies are operating or recruiting in your region yet. So there is going to be probably, once again, you're going to be in that area where there's going to be hooliganism, but not, there's going to be mayhem, there's going to be civil unrest, something like that. There will be issues. It will be rough, but you're not actually dealing with armies in your area. You feel like they're still a decent, safe distance away. So what would I do to survive in this case? I would first go ahead and execute a tactical bug-in. A tactical bug-in means, yes, I am going ahead and getting my weapons out to be prepared to defend myself, and probably in that case also property. Because once they encroach, if they are somebody who is going to be who's going to be an active threat, there's a good chance here I would really fortify my place off and make it very clear, nothing in, nothing out. This is a bug-in. I would really want to make sure that I have protected my spot there. That would protect me from that hooliganism. That's the point behind that, is to isolate myself from that as much as I can. But I'm also going to stage for a tactical bug out, which means taking my weapons as well and leaving. In the meantime here, I'm going to try and get all the intel I can find on everything that's going on. I want to know who each side is, where they're operating, what areas are significant to them, which is going to help me down here once it comes to staying away from everyone that you can later on, because if the armies or recruitment appears in your area, if there appears to be military activity in your area, you can fight off a few gangs of hooligans, but when it comes to armies, that's a whole nother thing, and that's why I would say that's where I'm going to bug out when that stuff happens. And that's where I'm going to use that intel that I studied earlier to stay very far away from where anyone would have any business being. I'm going to want to go way out and just try to get whatever intel I can, probably listening to commercial radio, something like that, see what type of information I can get, so I know what's going on. I can know when it's safe to come back, but I'm going to expect that they will probably demolish everything I leave, because I was on the fence, and that's how they will punish at that point. They're always out, in that case, in those types of scenarios, anyone who's on the fence, anyone who's not with them, is expected to be treated as the enemy, which means, yes, I would expect them to attack me while I'm there, attack the place once I'm gone and can no longer defend it. Will they waste a lot of resources chasing after me through the wilderness? Probably not. But that would be my spot where I try and survive, is very far away from where anyone would waste too much resources coming on over there. They don't have any real good reason to control that space. Away from population centers, away from anything of military value, of resource value, trying to keep away as much as possible. And then once it's safe to come back, then come back and rebuild. Thank you for watching.